Hello everyone, it's Brianna and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about my June wrap up. I did post on my YouTube community page that I was going to be taking a break for a little while because I have recently moved to a new apartment. I have officially moved out of my parents' house and I'm now living on my own. I have been super busy. It's been hectic. I've started my new job. I have been unpacking and cleaning my apartment, and I was planning on taking a break because I just didn't want to have to think about like filming things and focusing on YouTube for right now. I wanted to just settle down first, get comfortable. But I read some really amazing books in June and I couldn't wait to talk to you guys about it. I'm like vibrating with excitement. So I wanted to share everything that I read in June with you guys before I forget, because I need you guys to read the books that I read as well. So in the month of May, I definitely had a reading slump. I didn't read anything in May at all after reading 15 books in April, so it felt like a really huge shift. In June, I really just wanted to find some books that I enjoyed so I could get back into the swing of things, and I definitely found some huge winners when I was reading off of my TBR, so I'm really excited. The first book that I read in June was Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. This is a book that follows the story of our main character Felix. He is black, he's trans, he's queer, and he feels all the time like he's one marginalization too many. It's both a coming of age story and it follows the central conflict of one day Felix enters the art program that he attends over the summer and finds that one of the other people who goes to this art program has decided to post pictures of him pre-transition all over the school, as well as dead naming him so all the other students and faculty can see. This is of course an extremely traumatic thing, and the rest of the novel kind of builds around this central conflict. Felix trying to figure out who would want to do this, why they'd want to do something so horrific. I really liked how the story balanced that main conflict and balanced Felix's kind of coming to terms with who he is and then developing all these wonderful friendships on the side as well. I really liked the side characters. I did say that Felix in my mid-year freakout is one of my favorite characters that I've read in any novel so far this year. He's one of the protagonists that I just loved so much. I typically don't like the protagonist the most, but Felix Ever After just had me wanting Felix to be happy, to be loved. I wanted everything good to happen to him, and whenever anything bad happened to him, I would be so extremely frustrated that I would just have to put down the book. I'd have to stop reading just so I could relax again and get back to the story. And I actually really enjoyed the love triangle that was written. Typically I don't like love triangles in books, but Felix Ever After made one that was really well crafted, and props to Kacen Callender for this, for making me like a trope that I typically stray away from. I don't know, it wasn't even so much that I was super rooting for him to get with either of the characters that were in the love triangle, but I found that I really wanted all of them to just be happy however that might happen, and I cared for all of them almost equally. I mean, I liked Felix the most, but I cared for them all equally. Another thing that I really liked about this book, without spoiling too much, I like how it presents there are people who belong to marginalized communities who also turn around and then oppress others. I think it's really an important thing to note, and I think this book shows that really well, that there are people who consider themselves to be quote woke, but then also hold a lot of prejudices and can be transphobic or racist or whatever things also on top of being marginalized themselves. So I enjoyed reading this so much. It was just absolutely wonderful. And also, I read it in June during Pride Month. The book itself also takes place in Pride Month. So I highly recommend Felix Ever After if you can go pick it up. I'm probably gonna buy a copy myself just so I can have it in my personal library. Please do check it out and let me know what you think. The next book I read in June was Dear Girls by Ali Wong. Ali Wong is a Vietnamese Chinese comedian who I absolutely adore. This is her first book, I believe. She's writing letters to her two daughters about her life, about the lessons that she's learned from the experiences that she's had, and she's sharing it with all of us as well, and I absolutely loved it. At first I was reading a physical copy, but then I kind of felt like with her type of humor, and especially with any type of comedian or with memoirs especially, it's better to listen to the audiobook if the author is the same person who narrates it. Ali does narrate her own book, so I picked it up. I got it from Libby and it was amazing. If you guys are unfamiliar with Ali Wong's type of comedy, she's very dirty. She does have a lot of potty humor, and I mean that literally. She talks about poo-poo and pee all of the time. So if that's not your style, she talks about sex a lot as well, then maybe this book isn't for you. But for me, I don't mind it. I really like her style of comedy, especially I'm Vietnamese myself, so a lot of things that she says about trying to connect to her Vietnamese culture. She has a few chapters about talking about going back to Vietnam and feeling like she was way too American there, and people judging her, saying that she was too fat or she was too American, she was too opinionated. that resonated with me a lot. I went back to Vietnam myself recently and I was fat shamed there constantly. So I completely understand what she felt. Like, you go back to the place that's supposed to be like your home country and then you feel like an alien there, the same way that you feel other when you're in the United States. So I think for a comedy memoir, this was a lot deeper than I was anticipating. She writes a lot about her feelings with her identity. She writes about her miscarriage that she had when she was trying to get pregnant, about how that affected her. Even if you are not familiar with Ali Wong and her comedy, this is a really good memoir. I had a really good time. I enjoyed it a lot, and I find that she had a surprising amount of insights into things that I wasn't anticipating. I don't know, it was much more introspective than I was anticipating. I thought it was just going to be some light-hearted humor, but she does talk about a lot of really deep and important things in the memoir, so I had a good time. I definitely would suggest listening to an audiobook as opposed to just reading it. I think it'll be a better experience. The third book I read is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This was just a random one. It happened to be available on Libby, so I checked it out. This is a thriller that follows our main character, what's his name? Jason, I think. Jason, and one day as he's coming home from the bar, he gets kidnapped and then he's thrown into this whirlwind of a life. He wakes up after being kidnapped and finds that he's still in his same city, still in the same area, but now his wife doesn't know who he is. He has a completely different career and life path than he did when he had first, before he had woken up. Like, the life before is completely changed, it's completely gone. His wife doesn't know him. He has a new job, new career, new everything, and it's following him as he tries to piece together everything that happened to him, who kidnapped him, how he ended up here, what is this world that he's found himself in. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I thought the twists and turns of the book were really exciting. I couldn't really predict anything that was happening, and I really enjoyed that. The reason I didn't give it a higher rating is because some of the writing is really preachy. Because he gets transported out of his life that he had before into a whole new life. A lot of the book was talking about like, and this is why Jason loved his wife and he loved his son and he loved his old life, and it's just hammering into that you should be grateful for the life that you have and then not want other things. Sorry, my bangs are crazy right now. And you should be grateful for the life that you have. And I understood it, right? That makes sense. That's a really important message to give to readers, but this book isn't written for children, it's written for adults, and I think that it kind of just hammers you over the head with this message so much that I got really irritated reading it. The writing was super cheesy at some points, so the writing style wasn't exactly my favorite, but I think the story itself is interesting. So if you guys are looking for something easy to read, Dark Matter, check it out if you'd like. I don't care either way. This didn't really make a huge impression on me. The fourth book that I read, if you guys watched my mid-year freakout, I already gushed about this book a lot. It is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was fantastic, amazing. Everything Elizabeth Acevedo has written that I have read has been amazing. It follows the story of 2 girls. One is named Camino and she lives in the Dominican Republic, and the other is named Yahara and she lives in New York City. These 2 girls do not know the other's existence, and they only discover about the other girl when their father takes a flight from New York City to the Dominican Republic and the flight crashes and he passes away. Once this happens, Yahaira and Camino discover that their father had a second family in another country that they didn't know about, another daughter. They're around the same age and they have very different lifestyles, different personalities, and they're trying to come to terms with both their father's death and with this new discovery. And I think the writing was incredibly beautiful. If you have the chance, please read this book, especially if you really enjoy good family dynamics like I do. Family dynamics are the most important part of any book for me. I always like books that are about families and found families. And even though these girls are technically blood related, I do feel like it has more of a feeling of found families because they didn't grow up together. I don't know, it was just so much of it was very warm about the feeling of female relationships, specifically about how women endure certain types of violence, certain types of oppression, and how they become closer together because of these things that they've experienced. I loved it. I have nothing but praise for 5 out of 5 stars. One of my favorite books that I've ever read, especially recently. Highly suggest. Everything Elizabeth Acevedo writes is chef's kiss. Please read it. The next book I read is Love from A to Z by S.K. Ali. This I also give a 4 out of 5 stars. I read quite a few YA contemporaries recently in June and I had a great time with all of them. Love from A to Z follows 2 characters named Adam and Zainab. They are the A and the Z. They are two characters. They're both Muslim and they're spending their spring break in Qatar, and they don't know each other, but they have met on the plane to Qatar and then start to develop a romantic relationship. Zainab has left for Qatar early for her spring break because she has been suspended from her high school after standing up to her Islamophobic teacher and being accused of threatening his life. So she's suspended. She ends up going early. Adam has recently been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and he's dealing with that diagnosis as he flies back to visit his father and his sister. So both of these characters are dealing with a lot of personal conflict, and then they get to meet each other and then start to fall in love. And I think what this book does extremely well is that it builds up both of them as individuals first before it focuses on their romantic relationship. And I really appreciated that when I was reading, especially from Zainab's point of view. Again, in my mid-year freakout, I said she's probably my favorite character that I've read from this year. I related to everything that she was saying about that struggle of wanting to speak out against injustice, about wanting to call people out for being incorrect, for being wrong, for being bigoted, and then suffering a bunch of backlash for it because people don't like being called out. I loved that SK Ali developed Adam and Zainab as their own distinct voices before ever even like writing about them being romantically involved. Even though it was very cute, there's a lot of fluffy moments between them, what I appreciated the most was that they're both very strong voices, strong individual distinct voices from each other, and that we get to see that play out. I feel like I cared a lot more about the romance because I cared about the characters individually. It's not even so much that this book was deeply emotional, like I cried or anything, but I feel like the way that the author went about writing these stories felt really raw and really real, in a way that I think a lot of YA contemporaries kind of just gloss over the more difficult aspects of things that happen, and then it never delves in deep to these types of situations, or these types of characters especially aren't often represented. So getting to read an Own Voices book featuring a Muslim character was really cool. I really enjoyed it. The final book that I read in June is The Hunger Games by Kacen Callender. This was a reread for me. I had originally read them when the books had come out when I was, I think, late elementary school, early middle school. I think I was probably like 13 when I was reading them for the first time. I give Hunger Games a 4 out of 5 stars. If you have been living under a rock and have somehow never heard of the Hunger Games before, a quick TLDR version of it is it follows the story of a teenage girl named Katniss Everdeen who lives in District 12. They live in a post-apocalyptic North America, and it's basically built on the rubble of what used to be the United States. The country is now called Panem, and every year the capital holds this competition called the Hunger Games, and from each district, there are 12 total, they have to send 2 children aged between 12 and 18 to fight to the death in the Hunger Games until there was only one victor left, and they represent their district and become this huge winner. They get a lot of fame, fortune, etc. Then one year everything falls apart because Katniss's little sister Prim, who's 12 years old, is entered for the first time, and her name gets pulled as the tribute. So Katniss volunteers to take Prim's place in the Hunger Games and then enters his world where she has to now fight to the death to survive and return to her family. There is love, there's love triangle. This is like the blueprint for every dystopian novel with a female character that you've read since she is the one. Katniss Everdeen set the stage for all of these other girls who try to take her place afterwards. She is it. She is the one. I read this again and I remembered why I was obsessed with this series when I was in middle school. It is amazing. I've also since read Catching Fire, but that's probably going to be my July wrap up because I didn't finish it until like the 2nd of July. Why is the Hunger Games so good? I read a few things that I had read when I was in middle school, early high school recently, and I was like, what the hell was I thinking? This book is terrible and I don't know why I liked it. I reread the Hunger Games and I was like, this book was amazing, and 13-year-old me had amazing taste. I just genuinely thought the action is so well written. I think Kacen Callender, her calling is writing extremely good action sequences. She balances suspense and tension and violence and all the things that make up action sequences so well that when I read them, my heart's beating extremely quickly. So even if I'm not seeing any of it play out and I'm just reading it page to page, I feel anxious in the way that no other book with these types of like war scenes has ever made me feel. Reading it again, knowing everything and how it all plays out did nothing to stem the flow of emotions. I was crying, I was furious, I felt butterflies in my stomach when Peeta says and does the things that he says and does. Everything felt so new and raw to me, and I have not reread any series that made me feel the same level of emotion that I felt originally when reading it. And even 10 years later, reading it as an adult, I was so obsessed with everything that happened. I have not cared about a romance in a fantasy novel since The Hunger Games, and rereading it, I still cared. I was so obsessed with Peeta, and he was the love of my life when I was 13, and I read it again now, and I still felt my heart beat so hard for that boy. I am in love with him. I was so excited to be reading this again. I breezed through the first one, breezing through the second one. I'm halfway through Mockingjay right now, and it's just, how is this series stood up to the test of time in a way that I was not anticipating. I was so ready to read this again and be like, this is trash, why did I like this? And I read it again and I was like, this is gold and nothing will ever touch it. It's so good. I'm really excited. I did this reread so that I could read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which I'm nervous about because some people have given very mixed reviews. Some people have loved it, given it 4 or 5 out of 5 stars. Some people were like, this is trash and it should have stayed in the drafts. Lots of controversial opinions about that book, so I'm excited to read the prequel. That kind of bums me out, but I'm gonna read it for myself, let you guys know what I think, so stay tuned for that. But for now, that is all of the books that I read in June. Thank you guys for joining. I hope you're doing well, and hopefully I'll be back with more regular content in August. I'll see you guys later.